We'll start today's session. Uh, today's we are uh, we are going to have a very different topic. In the last five days, you have seen there was lots of observations and then interpretation was done on the basis of mathematical analysis. Now there is another part of analysis is there where you can analyze different mathematical algorithms and to get the extraction of new set of knowledge. The things which is not directly visible, but you can analyze in a different forms, and then you can get at that part, and that is the strength of mathematics. I will give one instance is that about the gravity waves. We all know that part. Einstein was able to see those gravity waves using mathematics 100 years back, where the hundred of thousands, hundreds of scientists using millions of dollar funding, they were able to see this part. So the observation has a limitation, but the mathematics gives us a direction to go through this part and then visualize this part. Especially in geosciences, the observations are very limited in terms of space and time. We are analyzing the processes at different space, different times, and we can only make a limited time of observations. And that's where these kind of approaches are very important. So with this background, I welcome Professor Dayasagar. Professor Dayasagar is the head of department and he's the founding head of the System Engineers and Information Unit of ISI Bangalore. He did the extensive work on the fractals, mathematical morphology, on the DM data set, and using different remote sensing approaches. His basic education, BSc, MSc, and PhD was from Andhra University, and with most of the work from IIT Kharagpur in a geophysics department. His work has been followed extensively, and he has been also been his work has been rewarded in a many way. He has been rewarded the Dr. Balakrishnan Memorial Award in 1995, Dr. Krishna Medal of Indian Geophysical Union, and recently he is the only Asian who has received the George Mathranan Award in 2011. So that's his work. He is driving a very new area in India specifically, and we requested him to come and then give you an exposure of that part. In a one day, it is not possible to give the whole thing, but we requested and we are very thankful. He is directly coming from Bangalore. He wake up around 3 o'clock and then before 9 o'clock, he was in the office. And so we are very thankful, Professor Dayasagar. And please, yes, start.
Yeah, good morning. Is there anyone who had about the word mathematical morphology? I think you know them individually, like piecewise, mathematics and morphology. But it is typically mathematics to study the shapes, and morphology actually stands for uh, science of shapes. And is there any approach that can be used to quantify the shapes? And that is where there was one field called mathematical morphology, which was invented in late 60s by a supervisor and the student. So their initial target was, I can reduce this. Their initial target, actually there was a kind of assignment for them, and is it too loud? I, or otherwise I can speak with simple voice and no.
Maybe mobile.
Yeah, yeah, actually mobile I have written. Yeah. So coming back that this particular field was actually invented by a supervisor and student. Incidentally, they both had two PhDs, one in pure mathematics, another one is in mining engineering. And their initial target was actually to uh, find out gold ore tonnage at the locations, some unknown locations. So they have certain samples which were very randomly placed, and by using those neighborhood values, can they really find out what is the gold ore tonnage at a specific location where they don't have data? So that was the challenge they had, and then slowly they developed the ideas. And by early 70s, it has become a full-fledged subject. You can say it's a branch of geometry. It's a branch of um, probably topology, and it follows a pure mathematicians. They talk about the space that we talk, which is a Cartesian coordinate system. They say it is a lattice. Within lattice, what all that can be performed, what kind of transformation that you can perform. But eventually it has become a powerful engineering topic. The mathematical morphology is now very popular in computer science and mostly in image processing. If you are familiar with digital image processing, at one part of the whole digital image processing is about object description, and they also talk about image analysis. So in these two topics, and mathematical morphology gained a lot of popularity. But as the years passed by, and people have really not used mathematical morphology in geosciences. Incidentally, it was actually developed for geosciences and mining engineering related topics. But because there is a lot of money in other like computer engineering and electrical electronics engineering, there are many projects with huge grants, and they started using these ideas. But in geosciences, not many have used, but I know a few people who sit in Center for Mathematical Morphology, Fontainebleau, in near Paris. Fontainebleau is another very interesting place. If because many of you are geologists, there is Fontainebleau sandstone, which is they treat that as a kind of a black box. Many sedimentary geologists, and they study Fontainebleau sandstone, for which they have all kinds of properties, and then they start analyzing that, and then they try to relate with the properties. And on Fontainebleau sandstone, they use mathematical morphology for various purposes. Now it's okay. For various purposes they have used, and but I should tell that it was not used by anybody in geomorphology. Geomorphology is another beautiful subject, and where I remember some 25 years ago, I started learning about simple morphometric analysis by taking topographic map, and I think you are all familiar with morphometric analysis. And by putting a tracing sheet and then trace the river network, and then order that river network with the Staller-Horton ordering system, and then start computing bifurcation ratio, mean stream length ratio, and then mean stream area ratio. And then they make some kind of predictions out of those quantities. But very interestingly, not many of us are not familiar with those terminology. We know that bifurcation ratio, mean length ratio, and then mean area ratio, but they are actually called topological quantities. And using those topological quantities, subsequently, someone mentioned that by using RB and RL, that is bifurcation ratio and mean length ratio, you can compute the dimension called fractal dimension. And the way it is linked, and see, those people who have coined those terminology like bifurcation ratio and mean length ratio, they are typically civil engineers or geomorphologists. And but after some 4 or 5 decades, and Professor Mandelbrot, who is the father of fractal geometry, has confirmed that these two quantities are These two topological quantities are very important to compute the fractal dimension. They follow scale invariance properties. And that is a remarkable thing that the people who have given in 1940s and 50s, those morphometric order ratios, were confirmed that it is indeed a powerful a quantitative measure, which has been further used in geomorphology. But I would tell why I am talking about mathematical morphology, but I am also mentioning the words like fractal geometry. There is some connection there. Mathematical morphology founder and fractal geometry founder, these two are the students of the same professor, Professor Paul Levy. If you are a mathematician, you will understand Paul Levy was a father of probability theory. And he has produced, at least we all know that there are four powerful students of Paul Levy. One was Georges Matheron, the inventor of mathematical morphology. The other one was Professor Mandelbrot. Other two are Wolfgang Dobson, and people talk about stochastic process. And Wolfgang Dobson was one of the pioneers, and people call him as the co-father or co-founder of stochastic process. There was another person, one Michael Lowe. I don't know their works, but Wolfgang Dobson's work, and you can always refer, and you can type and see who is Wolfgang Dobson. He's a very interesting person, and he committed suicide. He was in military camp, and he used to write on a small notebook about some equations, and those equations were revealed only after 2001, and he committed suicide in 1942 or around that time during Second World War. But very interesting, these are the people, the students of Paul Levy. And I know these two students, these Professor Georges Matheron and Professor Mandelbrot, and they also know me very well. But using those ideas in geomorphology, I think it has, those theories have given, very powerful concepts, but showing the applications of that and trying to convince the core geomorphologists uh, to tell that it is indeed a powerful mathematical theory, which was ignored by geomorphologists for several decades. But even now I face problems like explaining this mathematical morphology and trying to convince earth scientists specifically, this is a very good field and why don't you approach this? And they, you see that I still face problems, like in the sense I conduct some work using mathematical morphology and I publish. And beyond that, and when I see the citations, there are not many people who would cite them. Because they say, oh, he has used some mathematical field and is it really useful? I don't know. This is where whenever people call me to give lectures, and I don't deny them because I see it as an opportunity to showcase the work, and with a kind of a selfish motive that is there somebody really would take this work to the next level. I think this requires morphological thinking. So can somebody think morphologically? And to think morphologically, certainly this mathematical morphology would help. I would show some very basic transformation because I was told the first hour is about mathematical morphology and applications. And I would show some kind of simple snapshots, the probably first hour, and then subsequently I'll only use the board. And it is not difficult mathematics. You should also bear in mind that I am not a mathematician. I did my master's and PhD in geoengineering, and mathematical morphology I learnt during my PhD time. And I was told that there are geologists, geophysicists, and geographers. And it's not too difficult mathematics. I'll put those mathematical transformations in such a way that you would understand good that it is being recorded. And I will also show you some NPTEL style lectures I have given in IIT Kharagpur. And you can access all those lectures, not now, after these lectures, and you can see it. If there is any confusion, You can refer to those lectures and it is easy to follow. So, as I mentioned, as Vikrant mentioned, I am from System Science and Informatics unit. It is one of the 8 units of Computer and Communication Science Division of Indian Statistical Institute. So, this is the first computer science unit we established in Indian Statistical Institute Bangalore Center, and we actually develop algorithms for various different purposes, and I am keen to develop algorithms for useful for spatial data sciences. Whatever we see on about geomorphology maps and satellite images, they are all the kind of spatial data, and how to process them, what is the best thing that you can really glean out of that data, what is that we can really retrieve from, if I give you a spatial data on a gridded form, and we know that there is a lot of information there, and our naked eye tells that there is a lot of information. But to retrieve that, and what is the information hidden there? There is geometric information hidden there, topologic information hidden there, and morphologic information hidden there. And how to retrieve these 3 kinds of geometric, topologic, and morphologic information, and what do they actually represent? And to tell in a simple language, on a topographic map, which are the topological networks there? And simply the blue lines or river networks, stream networks. So you have seen that, and you talk about the morphology of that network. How to quantify that network morphology? We know morphometry. Morphometry gives us these topological quantities, as I mentioned, bifurcation ratio and mean length ratio. Beyond that, can we really talk about that network? I think there is, so if you know a bit of a new kind of mathematics, whether it is fractal geometry or mathematical morphology, I think our ability to explain some of the characteristics that we were unable to explain through simple morphometry or hypsometry would be improved, and that is the core motivation of this talk. And then this slide also I always used to show, and the retrieval, information retrieval, we talk a lot. In computer science and in many different engineering fields, information retrieval is a very hot topic. But what is that information that we have interest in? That information is like, topological network retrieval, river networks, ridge connectivity networks, mountain objects, and then sand dune patterns, and simple lakes, topographic depressions, topographic highs, peaks, pits, all that. I can name a host of several different terms which would be quite relevant for any geoscientist, any earth scientist. So after retrieval, what is that we have to do? And many engineers I have seen, they spend 90% of their effort up to retrieval. They say, I have developed a powerful algorithm for information retrieval. But that is where the actual science starts. And when you can retrieve precisely the very important information that is hidden in the data, if that data is available at a multiple spatial scales and multiple temporal scales, the moment we talk about the time and how a specific feature is changing its geometry across time periods, and then can we really understand the dynamics of that? And in earth sciences, you have all these words, very nice words like geodynamics they talk about, geomorphologic dynamics. And the moment we talk about dynamics, there is a lot of nonlinear physics we have to really bring in those ideas. And nonlinear physics ideas are like something is changing with time, and can we really construct an attractor for that? Can we really construct an attractor for that? So that attractor would tell you what is the trajectory of a specific parameter of a specific process or phenomenon, how it is changing with time. And we have a very nice, there is a butterfly effect, and which was explained with a kind of strange attractor. And in climate science, and really they have adopted those ideas to explain the dynamics of some certain phenomena. And but in geomorphology, and we used to see many features. Some features they keep changing very often. Probably you can say that highly time varying, and some features they change probably even after 100 years of interval, and you don't see much changes in those things. But can we say that there are certain phenomena which are slowly varying, and certain phenomena highly time varying, very broadly in a descriptive sense, in qualitative sense I am talking. But if what is that feature or the characteristic or the parameter that you can really record when you see the changes across the time periods, and that using that parameter, can we really follow what is the trajectory of that particular parameter when you have a huge amount of data, let us say some millions of years of data that you have at as close as possible, the intervals, and you take one specific parameter, and what is the movement of that particular parameter? Is it very simply an irregular surface is becoming regular and becoming a stable surface, or highly regular surface has become highly irregular over a period of time? And these things can be explained through some of the concepts from nonlinear physics. And that prompted me to write this simple sentence. To understand the dynamical behavior of a phenomenon or a process, a good spatio-temporal model is essential. To develop such a model, well analyzed and well reasoned information that could be retrieved from spatial and or temporal data are important ingredients. You are actually, our main target is to understand the dynamical behavior of a specific phenomenon or process. And I would explain you what is that, how a sand dune forms. From geoscience perspective, if you see Barkan dunes and very beautifully organized dunes, and many theoretical pieces say there is a lot of self-organization there, and that's how you have started seeing very beautiful patterns. But I will simply say, very simple, I am putting sand, dry sand, each sand particle is of the same shape and size, and if I keep on putting it, and it initially it forms a small heap, and then it becomes a peak one, and after that, once it reaches to certain critical angles, and then it starts sliding. It was explained very nicely. They, I think, using that sand pile example, self-organized criticality, the word, there is a word called self-organized criticality, SOC, which was given by Professor Per Bach. Per Bach has written a beautiful book, How Nature Works. And he also spoke about simple power laws involved in earthquakes. And he has explained the earthquakes and then sand piles and 1 over F noise. So that's a small book. If you get a chance, you read that, How Nature Works by Professor Per Bach. And then this avalanches start falling it. And another simple example that I would explain, uh, what exactly is the dynamical behavior? You just imagine that there is a frictionless pendulum and oscillating back and forth. And can that be explained, that whole behavior, on a phase space? And it is shown like a kind of limit cycle. It goes back and forth to the same place. And if you create friction, and it goes back and forth, and it loses its energy and it comes to rest state. And its corresponding dynamical behavior is explained on a phase space map, like a simple spiral. So it comes to the rest state. We just keep those two things in mind, and in geomorphology, we see a host of such phenomena and process. And many things they keep changing with time. There are so many controls. And forget about all those controls. You see the phenomenon, how it is changing, its morphology is changing. And can we really draw a kind of a path for a trajectory synchronizing these changes? The way we have drawn a spiral for the pendulum that is oscillating with a creation of friction, and similar attractors, can we draw that? I think this is where we have to see as a next step, and that would be really phenomenal. And so forget about citations and all that, but looking at that, and you can really, it's not just publications of the having more publications of the work, but if we can very satisfactorily say that we have given a new insight for younger generation of younger generation geoscience. So I could see these are the words like I mentioned about retrieval, retrieval, analysis, reasoning, and modeling and visualization. So, is there a single mathematical field that can really handle all these 5 or 6 different topics? And I mentioned retrieval, analysis, reasoning, modeling, and visualization. And I realized, because I don't know any other mathematical field as much as I know about mathematical morphology. Mathematical morphology is one of the better choices to deal with all these key aspects mentioned here. Key aspects mentioned here. So, when do you really use these words? When you have very precise error-free data. What is that data? So, I don't say the topographic map is data. Topographic map is actually information. And where is confusion there? There is no confusion in topographic map. You have well drawn networks, because it was all surveyed and drawn, prepared the topographic map to the scale. Hard work, very, very difficult task. But now there is another field where they also use interesting mathematics, is photogrammetry. Using many photogrammetric ideas, they wanted to, can we really prepare the topographic map without going for surveying? Physically going to the surveyed area and then mapping. And but by taking the satellite images, generation of certain 3D models, and then can we really make noise-free information? Noise-free information. Like as I mentioned, topographic map itself is a kind of noise-free information. You name the feature and you have it there. Probably there are certain features not there, but you can always visualize what are those features. And very conspicuous feature that is not existing on a topographic map, let us say Survey of India topographic map, is the ridge lines. We have valley connectivity network, but we don't have ridge lines. The ridge lines and valley lines, very recent interest. Why valleys and ridges are so well organized, in the sense equispace they say it. So what is a valley? Typically this is a valley and embedded between two ridges. And if you draw this valley connectivity network as a segment, typically our blue line on a topographic map, the distance between that line to the ridge line and distance between this line, this blue line to this side ridge line is very well organized. And but that was actually well taken by the recent quantitative geomorphologist Perron, Kellen Whipple, and these people have written 3 or 4 papers in Nature and Science. So for that, what kind of data required? We know that I can show like what is that a texture of the landscape, the title of the paper which was published in Nature, and why this particular landscape is where the streamlines and the ridge lines were equally spaced. And of course, nature is very beautiful. I think we have to accept what are all the controls that are acting are finally giving a beautiful pattern on the terrestrial surface. So I would show some simple snapshots, and just to have some interest on to understand what is that you are going to get out of the mathematics that I would explain after an hour. And these are some of the results. And look at this. These are the two people I was referring, Professor Georges Matheron and Professor John Serrar. And these two are both pure mathematicians, and he had mining engineering PhD and he had civil engineering PhD. But very interesting aspect is that the field of mathematical morphology is so powerful in engineering. In computer engineering, we have several computer science PhD students. They use mathematical morphology mostly for filtering and segmentation, and it has many advantages over spectral based filtering techniques, which are very popular in digital image processing. But anyway, they also left working in geosciences, but there are other next generation people who work. So look at this. This is my data, and which has been generated. It's a synthetic landscape, and with your earth sciences background, and you would agree this looks like a kind of digital elevation model. And how this was generated also I would explain subsequently. And I have taken a simple fractal outline, and then I try to put the contours inside in a very meaningful way by following some morphological operations. And then I have assigned certain kind of gradients as the codes, and then I have taken this superposing of all those various layers, I could generate this landscape. I would call this as a synthetic digital elevation model, or also it can also be called Hortonian fractal digital elevation model, because it follows all Hortonian properties. I think geographers would be knowing who is Horton. Horton was the one who gave the initial impetus for river morphometry. Horton was a civil engineer. In 1945, he has written a beautiful paper, and I should say that is the origin for most of the morphometric studies. And it follows the Hortonian laws, and Hortonian laws are law of numbers, law of lengths, and law of areas. And it follows that, and then I mentioned it is Hortonian fractal digital elevation model. And I am not sure whether those two lines are clear here, but there are green lines and blue lines, and in an exaggerated version you can see that. I would show subsequently. And how to extract those blue lines and green lines from digital elevation model. And we have very nice, commercial softwares like ArcInfo. By feeding a kind of DEM as the input data, and it computes the whole river network. Very nice, and but how it works when you take a digital elevation model of a, let us say, tidal region. On fluvial region, you see a lot of intricacy. There are sudden changes in the hilly regions and valleys and all that. There, many of those algorithms where they follow Newton's descent property, and it can construct the river network very easily. But if you take a rather gently sloped region, as you go down to the the river mouth, you see tidal regions. At that tidal region, if you have a digital elevation model, can you really compute a possible river network there. And I believe many of those commercial softwares would give the river network like a straight line streaks, and which I say it's spurious. But we require some approach which can capture the curvatures. If you look at very carefully on a topographic map, besides blue lines, which are the stream networks, and you see brown lines, which are actually contours, elevation contours. If you isolate one elevation contour, and you see it like a jagged line, and you have projections, you have projections downward, projections upward, and can we call them as delta shaped and V shaped features? And we also call them as crenulations, and crenulate line we say it, and which is very jagged. If you look at those blue lines, and those blue lines would actually follow all delta shaped things. And when you have the contours and contours and contours and contours, and if you track the path of the blue line, it follows all the delta shaped projections, and it follows that. And then obviously the V shaped regions are the ridge line. And to capture these crenulations, how to isolate crenulations from all possible contours? I mentioned all possible contours. We see contours at 20-meter interval, there is a contour, and then 40-meter interval, 60-meter interval, there is an interval of 20 meters. But I want to see all possible contours, and can I really insert in between 20-meter contour and 40-meter contour? Can I really interpolate a 30-meter contour? So it is, you have one source and one target, that is 20-meter contour is the source and 40-meter contour is the target. In between you want to actually interpolate one more line. And once you interpolate one more line, between 30-meter contour line that you have interpolated and the 20-meter contour, you can really create one more interpolated line. So I meant, so once you fill the whole space with all contour lines, what you get is actually a noise-free digital elevation model. But those things we don't need to do by taking the contour lines tracing from the topographic map and then create that. We have very interesting DEM generation mechanisms and spot stereometry. At the initial years, probably in early 90s, spot satellite used to give pictures of the same region with two angles, and by following the simple stereographic principle, they generated DEM. And over the years, we have interferometry based mechanism. So they take SAR synthetic aperture radar data, and then they generate by following the interferometry mechanism, you have digital elevation model, very powerful. And if you want more details about it, who was the person who has used those interferometry based DEM very successfully was Howard Jepker from Stanford University. He has actually shown pre-earthquake DEM and post-earthquake DEMs generated through interferometry. And he has found out there was a fault, geological fault shifted about 15 centimeters. So that subtle changes could also be recorded by using the interferograms. And this is all some background history about why we have to really talk about digital elevation models. And of late, many people were criticizing, oh, there are a lot of uncertainties in DEMs. And I don't want to talk about uncertainties in DEMs. And many people used to ask me, how accurate are your algorithms that you have developed by using mathematical morphology transformations? I used to tell my algorithms are very powerful as long as the source data that you provide me is error free, and my algorithms would work perfectly fine. What are the errors? Errors, probably some missing values, some geoid corrections were not done, some atmospheric corrections were not done on the images, using which they have developed generated DEMs. And if you consider all those corrections were done, and then a DEM which is completely noise free and error free is given to me, and most of my algorithms would be very, very robust and they work very fine. Okay. So some algorithms at the beginning, we tried how to extract the river networks and ridge connectivity networks, and that is what not quite visible here. There are green lines and blue lines. And then once you get that topological network, they are hidden here, and morphology would really help us to retrieve those hidden features. So that's how we have extracted here. And then once you have that, and you can actually partition them into basins, sub-basins, watersheds. And then what we can do, this is actually at the small watershed level, we have partitioned the whole region. And then we subsequently use those, uh, you know, sub-watershed level geometric information to construct, to derive certain power laws. We call them as allometric power law relationships, or you call them as simple fractal power laws or scale invariant power laws, whether they are universal constants or they are locally universal, and all that we have used by taking the information that is derived from a synthetic landscape or synthetic DEM like this. And then subsequently using the same ideas, what was the idea we used there? Skeletonization. There was a transformation called morphological skeletonization. So morphological skeletonization is, there is a body here, and if you keep on shrinking from all sides and until last but one level, and it reaches to the skeleton. So can we really derive that skeleton? That is the principle involved. So, but that could be explained very well through morphological operations. And you look at this feature, and there is a kind of fractal, and you can see this. Yeah, from that fractal object, we have extracted the skeleton. That skeleton is order designated. Taller order designation. I think subsequently you take morphometry, right? So two fingertips are first orders. All fingertips are first orders. Where two first orders join, a second order forms. Where two second orders join, a third order forms. That grows. And like that, if you give some order designation and you see a fractal network like this, interestingly, all this, those if you compute Hortonian order ratios, and they follow, Horton's law. This fractal object is created, deterministically created. How a fractal basin can be created, if time permits, I would also explain, though it is not linked to mathematical morphology. And then if you can compute the topologically prominent regions within that fractal, and those are the, you can see with the different colors here. These are all topologically prominent regions with similar characteristics. So that is how we have color coded. And then if I put a kind of vertical exaggeration, larger the grayscale value, higher the peak of the mountain, smaller the grayscale value, it is the topographic depression. And then we could generate landscapes like this. And I would call them as fractal landscapes. And why should we really generate fractal landscapes? By seeing a realistic landscape, can you simulate that? To simulate that, what are the transformations that you require? One aspect is, at the first glance, one should understand is, if you are talking about the landscape within a basin you are simulating, you have to consider the basin boundary into consideration. So how rugged is the basin boundary on a simple planar form? Then you keep trying with different rules. Can you really simulate the way we have generated the internal topological region, and by following various different rules, you should be able to generate some landscape. Is that landscape exactly mimicking the realistic landscape that you are taking as the basis? And if it is not mimicking exactly, and then probably you have to change your rules. Can we derive a rule by seeing the realistic landscape? So these are some of the ideas, but it's very hard, and it's not sufficient for one person to really handle all these things. But there are ideas you can really incorporate. That was one aspect. And then in many, I read some of the works of two schools. Both the schools talk about quantitative geomorphology. Quantitative geomorphology. One school is completely dominated by theoretical physicists, and other school is dominated by earth scientists. And there was one person, and I always used to mention Peter Sheridan Dodds. He was actually a mathematician, did PhD in Earth and Planetary Sciences Department of MIT. So he has typically worked on the river networks. He has written a very nice thesis. So in his thesis, each chapter is a publication, published in, where it is published, they are published in Physical Review journals, Physical Review E, Physical Review letters, and each of the chapter is published in one of those things. But the question is, a true quantitative geomorphologist with earth sciences interest may not appreciate the inferences that he has given in the thesis. He always talks about invariance, scale invariance. So that is where if you put three different networks, topologically invariant means topologically same but geometrically different. All three different networks which are geometrically dissimilar but topologically invariant, topologically similar, would yield the same Hortonian laws. Bifurcation ratio we compute for network A, network B, network C. Bifurcation ratio is more or less the same. Stream length ratio, more or less the same. And then they say, oh, these three networks are topologically invariant because these laws, Hortonian laws are more or less similar to each other. But they are geometrically very distinct, geometrically very different. That is where we thought that we want the measures that are scale invariant but shape dependent. In most of the fractal geometry studies, shape dependency was not considered. What is that shape dependency? You look at this particular, there was one basin, actually I have not shown the source. It is actually a small sub-basin in Andhra Pradesh, a small sub-basin, probably of some 8 square kilometers region. So very small sub-basin. And there is a network, that network follows Hortonian laws, bifurcation ratio, stream length ratio and the area ratio we computed. And there are many networks which are geometrically different, they are also having the same Hortonian laws. But what we have done, ignore the network. It is like in fractal geometry there is a concept called fat fractal. That fat fractal is from the whole body you remove the skeleton and whatever is left is the fat fractal they call it. So in geomorphic context, that fat fractal is the hill slope regions where there are no river networks, hill slope regions. And take that hill slope region and then you start characterizing that. That hill slope region geometric characterization would provide you a few measures which would be very useful to compute the geometric distinction between network A, network B, network C basins. And they are topologically invariant but geometrically quite different. and to compute that geometrical difference, and we have given one approach called a morphological shape decomposition. Any irregular object can be decomposed into regular objects. You have very irregular object and you try to insert one circular block, a maximal inscribable block within that irregular object, and you remove that. On the remainder, you again try to put insert circular blocks of various different radii, and until the whole object is decayed, and you keep inserting the objects, and those objects are regular in nature, and they should not have any overlapping. And this is actually called packing an object with a non-overlapping discs. You say disk or non-overlapping square block, non-overlapping diamond-like blocks, and you can pack given region with various different shapes. And with different shapes, you get different scale invariant power law relationships. You can derive a scale invariant power law for here you can see we have packed this hill slope region with octagonal blocks, and we derived one power law, that is number radius relationship. And then if you change that octagon to a square or a rectangle or a triangle, and you get another power law which is scale invariant but shape dependent. With shape you can show the changes. So that also I will cover, and how I spoke about morphological skeletonization. I spoke about this landscape generation from the skeletal object, and then I spoke about morphological shape decomposition. And what are they? And I think there should be some curiosity for the subsequent lectures, and I would explain that. You look at here, and it is many mathematicians would talk about a space called Apollonian space. That Apollonian space is actually, this is the outline, and you can pack that with regular octagons of various different sizes, such that there is no void left. And once you pack that, how many biggest size octagons are there, and medium sized octagons are there, and still smaller size octagons are there, and smallest size octagons are there. It's very interesting. In nature you will see the smaller things are large in number, bigger things are small in number, and it follows a wonderful power law relationship. And they talk about dinosaurs, number of dinosaurs are some number, and as you come down with the the size of the animal category as a category, and probably tigers are so many number, and still smaller sized animals, and it has a wonderful relationship. In many mathematical biology studies you would see such kind of relationship. And similar thing, and if you follow the number and radius relationship, and we follow the kind of linear relationship, and we derive a power law. As I mentioned, that power law is a scale invariant power law. Under all scales, that power law would hold good. And the moment you say that across all scales the same power law holds good, and you say that power law is a universal scaling constant, and but that would change, that number would change the moment you change the shape with which you have packed the hill slope region. Here we have packed it with octagons, and if you pack it with a square, and you get a slightly different thing. So ultimately what matters is, it is not just the scale, it matters the shape. I think we all who are interested in geomorphology, we should really appreciate that, because shape matters. And this was also written by the same Peter Dodds in subsequent papers after his PhD, packing, sphere packing. Sphere packing was also published in some physical review journal, and there he ended with what matters is not just the scale, what matters is the shape. Very interesting studies, but I think there is nothing wrong to go across the discipline and to understand what are actually they are exploring, and many of those ideas would provide very interesting insights in the context of geomorphology. Then you look at, there was another thing in many quantitative geomorphology studies, we talk about width function. Width function is a kind of one-dimensional geometric support for any object. You take a basin boundary, and they take from the outlet, they try to go along the mainstream. So let me just put it here just to have an idea. If this is the basin, and probably the mainstream is like this, and at the first point, and what is the width? At the second point, what is the width? Like this, they measure the widths, and then finally they convert those widths at different levels, uh, a kind of plot they make it. So this they call it as a width function. In mathematics also, width function is a very important parameter. And that width function would explain about the overall geometry of the basin. And by looking at the width function, they talk about the runoff conditions, groundwater recharge conditions within the basin. And if the basin is like this, and probably you see a kind of a thin width function. If basin is very broad, probably you see a different kind of width function. If you have seen a kind of undulations, and you see the variations in the width function. But these width functions were until recent past, they take a planar basin and then they compute the width function. But with the advent of DEM like data, and we can actually compute the width functions between the threshold elevation regions. A DEM can be decomposed into maximum number of threshold elevation regions, which are just binary, black and white. And then between the successive threshold elevation regions, what would be the width function? We have given some synthetic study. You look at here, this is the basin, you have the lowest region, and then higher elevation region. So we have given it here. And if there is a flood, and that how those flood water would really go into occupy the whole basin region as the time progresses. And that is those the geodesic front lines or floodwater front lines are shown here. And for such a kind of thing, and if you plot a kind of width function, and initially the floodwater flows here, and then it occupies this hill slope region, and then goes to the next streamline at the higher elevation, and then it fills like this. And if you take those the distances, the geodesic front lines, and you can plot a one-dimensional geometric support like this. Would this really explain about the geometric organization within the basin? Certainly it should, and I would see that each of these peaks are like one kind of width function at one particular level. And so we have written about how geodesic front lines can be really derived from a given basin where you have various different elevation regions. That is another aspect. And then convexity measure. The convexity measure, for every level you can actually compute a convexity measure. What is the convexity measure? If I put an object like this, and the convexity measure is simply you put a convex hull around this. Convex hull is like you put a tight rubber ring around the object. Let us assume that you have some nails plotted here, nails pinned here, and if you put a tight rubber ring occupying all these nails, and probably it takes a shape like this. And then you compute the area under the total convex hull and area under the object, and you divide the area under the object with the area of the convex hull, you get a ratio. That ratio would obviously between 0 and 1. 0 and 1, and that is actually called convexity measure. If you can derive such kind of convexity measures for all possible elevation regions within a basin, and probably they look like this. If you call this as a kind of a topologically prominent regions within a basin, and their corresponding convex also would look like this. And from this also you can derive a host of various convexity measure like measures. That is another aspect. And then very important thing where we have a lot of interest now is the roughness computation. So in quantitative geomorphology, roughness has a huge big place, the term roughness. And we have various different approaches to compute roughness values. And very simple thing is root mean square error, they say it, RMS. At each level you compute the elevation, you know the elevation, and then make it squared elevation, and do that for everything, and then take the mean of all that, and then finally take the root of that mean value. That is the root mean square RMS they compute, and that is one very good roughness measure. Similar to that, we have even a simple standard deviation. It is to talk about what is the degree of homogeneity and degree of heterogeneity with a simple statistical approaches. And is there any other way? So the next step I would talk about the roughness calculation based on fractal approach. There is an approach called box counting method, and you place the various if this is the object, we have to compute what is its roughness. We keep placing the boxes or grids. The box is the word that I have to use for a three-dimensional object characterization. For a simple planar object like this, there are four grid box thing I have put that, and then through how many grid cells this object is getting traversed, and all four grid cells it has traversed, and then you refine your grid, and you have smaller grids, and then through how many boxes it is grids it is traversed, and then you keep on making the grid finer and finer, and then you find out what is the number. You have one is the fineness of the grids, and very fine to very coarse we have seen. Very coarse is just four grids. Very fine is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 grid cells on one side, and this is called step size. And number of grids through which the object is traversing is n, capital N. So step size versus capital N, if you plot on a double logarithmic axis, and you get a linear relationship, the power law of that is actually called fractal dimension of the object. So that fractal dimension would also explain us what is the roughness, the complexity of this object. But is there a shape that you have incorporated here? And the shape that you have incorporated, all your grids are square grids. So where is the shape involved here? No, that is where I could see mathematical morphology offers better approaches. Um, you can conveniently change the shape with which you want to quantify the shape. And I would say a circle is and a circle. A circle is a very smooth object with respect to a circle. Probably a circle is a very rough object with respect to a very irregular object. So I am actually investigating an object with another object. In entire mathematical morphology, you will investigate a specific object or surface or a function with another object. That object is actually called structuring element. So that structuring element, how to derive that structuring element? So derivation of that structuring element, can we really derive? This is a basin, and in which I could see there is a or topographic undulations, can I derive what is that structuring element with which I can say that this basin surface is very smooth. So that derivation is, can we call that as a kind of a discrete force? I don't know, but these are all, sometimes people used to accuse me that, oh, these are all philosophical speculations and no meaning. But we don't know. So once a philosophical speculation may come into come as a, a scientifically valid approach. So, but some of the things, there is more engineering, but less science here. And as I show these things further, and there is, see, if, if you ask me what is great in extraction of the river network, I would say it is a typically an engineering topic, information retrieval, and then subsequently generation of fractal graphics. It's good for probably creating the graphics, probably to put as you know background scene in a kind of movie. And but at the same time, but okay, computation of Hortonian laws, I would say that there is both engineering and science there, and we are talking about some topological invariance, and then again this computations, and then this yield slope quantification, and then some of these things are probably more towards the mathematical aspect, and then the computation of roughness has lot of science, and I am attending all lunar science meets, and after Chandrayaan 1 was launched, and they could derive digital elevation models, but not for the complete moon surface, because after 9 months it could not provide any images, but there were digital elevation models from Chandrayaan 1 mission, and we were asked to really look at the roughness quantification, and we have used completely mathematical morphology based roughness things, and there is a lot of science there. I think there are some groups which are really looking at those roughness values to derive some scientifically relevant inferences. And I would probably explain subsequently. This is a digital elevation model of a lower Indus Basin. Lower Indus Basin, probably in Himalayan and Pakistan region, we have Indus Basin. And then we partition that particular lower Indus Basin with 31 sub-watersheds, and each of the watershed will have one roughness value. How we compute that roughness value is, we actually apply a nonlinear filter called you contract and expand. You take an object and you contract and expand. I would call those two sub-process, contraction and expansion, is a cascade of contraction expansion. So how I contract? What is the degree of contraction? What is the degree of expansion? And I use, as I mentioned, there is another probing rule, structuring element. That structuring element is the smallest possible thing I would derive, define, and then with reference to that structuring element, I would contract and expand. And what would happen on the object? Depending on the conditions, if this object and the structuring element are homothetic to each other, in the sense geometrically similar, and it doesn't lose any information. But if there is some variation in the structuring element and the object that we are investigating, there is a loss of information. And this rule size I keep increasing, which means scale I am increasing, I am changing the scale, and then do the same process, contraction and expansion. And then what is the loss of information? And again I rescale the probing rule, and then I perform the contraction and expansion. And how the loss of information, what is the information that is getting lost with the cycle of contraction expansion, as the cycles are increasing, how this information loss is plotted in a kind of histogram like graph. And that graph would give us, it is actually the shape size spectrum of object with respect to another smaller object we have investigated, right? So that is actually called a study of granulometries, granulometric analysis they say it. So it has actually come from sieving. we actually sieve at home the rice grains with the different sieve mesh sizes. And if you increase the mesh size and if you decrease the mesh size, you have the sieves with different mesh sizes, and then put the material and how it gets graded according to the sizes. And this is typically size distribution, but those sizes we can also distribute according to sizes by changing the shape of the mesh. All the time we try to think that mesh is a square type of mesh. And if you put octagonal mesh, hexagonal mesh, and then triangular mesh, and then put the same material, how it is getting graded, and then we say it is size distribution, it is also shape based distribution. You have triangular grains and rectangular grains and circular grains, and you put everything, and so in a triangular mesh, and all triangular objects would sieve through, and the other objects would be, grains would be left on top. No. So the distribution that we can do is not just the size distribution, but also shape based distribution. And that is the principle involved in entire granulometric analysis to compute the roughness of each of the watershed. And then it is not just that, and do we have directional roughness? Directional roughness, probably when I look at some kind of surface within this block from the top, like with a kind of orthographic view, and it has certain roughness. But if I look at the same surface from this side to that side, and the roughness is something different, and that side to this side, and what is the roughness? And roughness has the direction, and that directional roughness values would let us know in what direction a particular basin is vulnerable for the forces acting in that particular direction. It is so intuitively I used to think, let us say there is in asbestos roofing, and we have like a wavy thing. You can break it very easily in this particular direction where there is a kind of wave pattern, but it is very difficult to break it in this the orthogonal direction of that wavy direction. And if you think that is correct, I think the directional roughness of the basin needs to be computed to link that with some kind of process in the process of understanding the quantitative geomorphology. So those are the ideas. So these pictures I would explain when I show some equations, and why a specific watershed is behaving differently under the cascade process of contraction expansion. This is showing a kind of evolution under the cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, like that with increasing cycles. This has behaved like this. The same basin, same watershed with a different rule, and how it has behaved with different cycles of contraction expansion. And so what are the different rules I have followed? A compact structuring element which is of 3 by 3 size, which is symmetric, and then which is circle in nature, the shape, and then these are the directions. And in this northwest to southeast direction, north-south direction, and northeast-south west direction, and east-west direction, and in 4 different directions, and how this evolution is happening. And all this is actually reducing this particular function, and I would call this as a function, probably a spatial function within a specific boundary. And this function is losing its information. Everywhere you will realize that, but that loss of information is not uniform across the rules. So with rule based loss of information is giving us rule specific roughness value. That then what is the relation between the rule and the roughness value, and the roughness value and the process between that is happening within the basin. So these are the things we can actually infer from this study, which was just published, and we don't know whether it would be taken in positive sense by the true earth scientists or geomorphologists. And a similar explanation, and I would explain these things as I show some of the equations. And we have, this is a global roughness index values. We have categorized the whole lower Indus basin into 3 or 4 roughness values, and then according to the directional roughness values, we have, you can see those lines. So the roughness value is very high in this north-south direction, whereas here, not very clear to explain. Okay, then do you have break? Another just 5 minutes. Yes. And then subsequently, the interpolations I spoke about. If you have a large database of so many DEMs, can we group those DEMs? It is again a kind of engineering interest. You have large number of images in a database, probably with the similar configuration, size specifications, and you have to group them. And how do you group them? And so, do you derive a network, a river network, and then compute these ratios, and then you try to do that? It's not required. Can we compute the distance between a function f and function g? And we can compute the morphological distances. And it is like if my face, the photograph of my face and the photograph of the same face, if I compute the distance between these two photographs with the same configuration, and it would give a value of 0. The distance is just 0. But similarly, if I compute with my face photograph with Ramindra's face, and there is a variation because these two faces are of two different people. And how to compute those morphological distances? The morphological distances are actually asymmetric distances in the sense, and object A is in a circular form and object B is in a square form, and the distance between this to this and this to this is different. It is like probably Gujarat state as an object and Karnataka state as an object, and if you compute the distance between this to this and this to this, it is different. How it is different and why we require asymmetric distances, and how we use those distances in computing the interpolations. And the object, see, between my face and his face, I can interpolate one face, and between that interpolation and his face, I can create one more. Between this interpolation and my face, I can create one more. And this is like my face is slowly transforming it into Ramindra's face. So it is like motorbike becoming a tiger, the morphing. That the word morphing, metamorphosis, is actually has come from earth sciences. And we would see how mathematical morphology would help us computing those interpolations. Those interpolations are very interesting because they are nonlinear in nature. And I have seen one very nice demonstration, thermal variations over Northern America, the temperature variations, maps, and how it is changing with the 6-hourly interval. They have the data at 6-hourly interval, and they show in a real-time mode. They follow the interpolation. Very beautiful, close to reality, not like many linear interpolations. And that is one aspect we would show, probably that is here. And there is a source DEM here, target DEM, and I could create an interpolation. And then in between these two, and I could create one more. In between these two, I can create one more. You can interpolate, you can create hierarchically these interpolations until there is no further scope for you to insert one more. And then you run it like a kind of movie, and you see a kind of source is becoming the target in a very nice transition. I think these are the aspects, and then mostly I covered everything except this portion. There is more than the geomorphology here. There is a spatial optimization aspect here that I would cover probably after the break. So, any questions?
Kindly describe the difference between topology, geometrical, and morphology. What is the difference? Like, I want to understand that you said that if a place having same topology and geometrically distinct, they can follow. If two place having topologically same, geometrically distinct, they can follow the same Hartonian law. What does it mean?
Yeah, I'll probably I'll put some a simple network here. And in quantitative geomorphology, we see this kind of, let us say, and I'll put a kind of network. Network like this. So then we compute those two topological quantities like bifurcation ratio after the order designation, and then mean length ratio. Then you have order 2 here, and then order 2 here, and finally it is formed like a kind of basin and network inside. And then taking all, how many number of first orders are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you have 4 second orders. And then you know that bifurcation ratio computation. And that is called RB. And then you have also mean length ratio. You compute all the lengths of all first orders and divide with the number. You get the mean length of the first orders, and compute the lengths of all second orders, and then divide that with the number of second orders. You get the mean length of second orders, and that is what is called mean length ratio. The same network, if it is like this, same network, if it is like this, this will also yield the same RB and RL, but geometrically completely different. I don't say completely different, but you can see that the course of these streamlines. And similarly, all these three networks are topologically invariant, but geometrically different. So instead of taking the network, and I would take the hill slope region, probably I will put a kind of hull around this, and then I remove the network from that, and then the remainder is this space. I would call that as a hill slope space, and that hill slope regions I would keep packing with some objects, the biggest possible circle, largest possible circle, and I will pack that with largest possible circle hierarchically, and then those circles and then corresponding numbers and then their radii would give me an option to plot a graph, and from which I can derive a power law relationship, a power law value, and that power law value would vary from the hill slope packing as I have done here for this network to this network and this network to this network. So which is again shape dependent.
So this two place will follow the same Hartonian law. Does it mean that will these two place have same erosion rate in, let's say, one component?
You are linking with actually geomorphic
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, but hill slopes control most of the erosions, right?
Achha.
Hill
Okay.
slope geometry would control the erosion. That they may be having different erosion characteristics.
So,
But as per the Hortonian laws, they are topologically, they are invariant. They are yielding the same things. And this is what, and these two schools, one school was very happy the moment we say, oh, it's following scale invariant power law. So that school is mostly dominated by mathematicians and theoretical physicists talking about the networks. But the other school is, they are not happy. Oh, so what? They are following invariant power laws. But in what way that is really useful for a geomorphologist? And but we feel that if you show the involvement of the shape, probably it may have some connections. But I think that would be seen through discussion.
So here, Huttonian law means that include what kind of things? Matlab, I don't know.
Newtonian laws, one inference, if the bifurcation ratio is very high, they say there will be no much tectonic activity is not influencing the network pattern. Such kind of inferences
Okay.
we have
Acha, acha.
from the the literature.
Okay.
From the literature, there may be many other inferences. I don't know, but of late, actually, I lost touch with the geomorphological studies. Of late, Whipple and this Perron and these groups are doing, and Gregory Tucker and these people are talking a lot about the geomorphological connections.
What does it mean by scaling variations? Scaling
Scale invariance.
variance or variation, the word that you use.
The scale invariance is if your scale invariance in the sense under all scales it would show the same slope value. If I show some relationship between let us say uh, size versus number, size versus number, the size of the animal, a specific size of the animal, and what is its number. Let us say smaller sized animals are large in number and bigger sized animals are small in number. You see a kind of relationship like this, and under all scales it is the slope value is the same. I would simply say that this is scale invariant. It is scale invariant. Suppose if you see probably this kind of plot, and this is a locally scale invariant, and the variance is slope value is different from here to here. There is a kind of change in phase, change in phase. And we have seen this, and this study we have just communicated. We have taken 2,90,000 water bodies on the Indian peninsula. These are all not actually water bodies, they are irrigation tanks. And then for each water body, there is some kind of influence. Influence in the sense that is also again a kind of interpolation. If water bodies are like this, I think I have shown it here. You look at this. These are the water bodies traced from satellite image. And if I can create what would be the influence of each of the water body, a zone of influence map is created. Zone of influence map is created. It is not watershed boundary. In a planar form, we created a zone of influence. And then those water body number, we have taken several different measures. For each water body, longitudinal length, transverse length, and area and perimeter. These are the geometric measures that we have taken. Longitudinal length and transverse length, and then the perimeter and the total area. And not only that, and we have also taken their influence zone parameters. So each of the water body has an influence zone, and then its longitudinal axis, transverse length, and the perimeter and the area. Obviously, this is like a custard apple. You have seeds, and around seeds you have a kind of a pulp, and each seed has certain influence. And then you can also visualize this. This is the line where we construct the dam to avoid seeing the flood water coming from this to this and this to this, and we construct a watershed line. So for these parameters, when we have computed these power law relationships, like what is the relationship between area and length, what is the relationship between longitudinal length and transverse length, relationship between perimeter and area. Interestingly, all these for 2,90,000 water bodies and their zones of influence, we got power law relationships which were universal in nature, but of two different universality constants. For zones of influence, we got one set of power law relationships, and for their corresponding water bodies, we got another set of power law relationships. Incidentally, all are scale invariant. Under all scales, the same power law value holds good. And we have put that universal fractal scaling power law relationships in water bodies and their zones of influence. That is the right subject.
Last question. So suppose two area is there. They have different fractal. I don't know. I have not studied about fractal dimension. Let's say fractal number is one is let's say 0.2, and other plus other area is fractal number is 0.8. What does it mean?
Yeah, so that actually quantifies the complexity. And if it is the object and probably object complexity, if it is simply a line because you are telling 0.2 and 0.8, probably you are talking about a kind of a Cantor dust or Cantor sector thing. And the higher the fractal dimension, higher the complexity,
Okay.
geometric complexity. And
So it is a higher roughness.
higher the roughness, yes, exactly. Higher the roughness. I'm just telling complexity and roughness, I'm interchangeably using that.
Okay. So,
So,
higher roughness means higher
dimension.
dynamics.
No, I'll show you here. So we have actually integer dimensions 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the Euclidean dimensions. But if I put a line here, and we will all be tempted to say that this is a straight line. This is a straight line which has a dimension 1. But if I put a line like this, we will tell this as per the Euclidean geometry knowledge, and we will tell this dimension is also 1. But fractally speaking, this is 1 and this is more than 1 and less than 2. What is 2? 2 is the space where the whole space is occupied by a line. Whole space is occupied by a line such that there is no void. So what does that mean? And you have completely occupied it. So completely space filling. The completely space filling. This is 2. This is 1. This is in between 1 and 2. This is in between. If I put a line like this, and it has a dimension more than 1 but less than 2. So when it will be 2? When this line has occupied the every space point here occupied, and then you say the whole space filling ability is very high, and the line has occupied every point of the space, and then it is 2. So in turn, the dimension of this is much higher than this. So these fractional dimensions or non-integer dimensions, the higher the dimension, higher the roughness. And I can give you the Brownian motion, the movement of the Brownian motion. You draw a trajectory, its dimension is 1.5. And I will show you some theoretically, deterministic fractals. We can generate fractals by knowing what should, I want to draw a line, and that line's dimension should be 1.5. If you fix like that, and I can draw a line, and I'll give a rule for that. There is a generation, there is a initiator. So you will initiate something on a specific line by using a generating mechanism. And we have some Koch curves, and one Koch curves, and Koch snowflakes, and they are all coming into the fractal applications. And we see such kind of features on geomorphology, very many features we see that. And one question I can, the title of a paper, how long is the west coast of Britain? And a typical geographer will tell, and he will measure the coastline length with the chartometer, and this is the length, convert with the scale. But it's actually, mathematician's point of view, it was Steenhouse paradox. At what scale you are asking? So in turn, you will take that length at different scales, and then you plot them like that, and then you derive the power law, and the length to the power of that power law would give you the actual length of the coast. So very beautifully explained in Mandelbrot's fractal geometry of nature. You allow dinosaur to walk along the coast of west coast, and you allow you then you find out what is the step size is the four legs and back leg distance, and then you allow a elephant to walk along, and the four leg back leg the distance in between is smaller than the dinosaur thing, and then you allow a horse to walk, you allow a human being to walk, and you allow an ant to walk, and these are all step sizes. At different step sizes you get a different length. You plot them on a double logarithmic axis, and then you derive a power law, and that itself is a scaling variant. You can say fractal dimension. Actually, all those ideas have many applications with respect to science in earth sciences in more than any other field, more than any other.
Can we convert the fractal dimension number into to quantify the magnitude of geomorphic process? Like, let's say example, if a place is 0.2 fractal dimension has a less geomorphic significance, is it directly proportional or something?
It has actually. If you look at the conventional quantitative classical quantitative geomorphology, we have hypsometry studies. From hypsometry, we talk a lot about stability, and they call monadnock stage, Young stage, and old stage, equilibrium stages. Actually, those stages we can actually link with the fractal dimension. There should be, but unfortunately, our group is too small. Our group is too small, like Earth Sciences group, and not many would really take up because of various fears, like in the sense publication is one aspect. If I write a nicely written mathematically oriented paper, and you say this is out of the scope of the journal. So that is where they follow, the majority of the group they follow. But these are all, the minor groups. And this is what I have seen. Many people, they appreciate listening lecture. Oh, these are all nice ideas, but nobody has taken. I have seen this person. As he has attended about 4 years, 5 years ago. In 2015, I could run a similar summer school for 15 days. Out of 60 lectures, I gave 45 lectures. They were all bored listening this. But see, he has taken it to some level and he is using the quantitative geomorphology. But we want more people. We want more people to work in these areas. It's a nice area. Actually, these works have actually fetched me a job in Indian statistics. You might be wondering, and how come this fellow is in Indian statistics?
Okay.
But I work in multiple areas, like both in engineering as computer science. But this is my most interesting field. And I always think about digital elevation model. It's like a black box. DEM is a black box with which we can do many things, but it requires somebody to make use of DEM in a proper direction. One should have the knowledge in discrete mathematics, graph theory, mathematical morphology, fractal geometry, and these the mathematical knowledge would really give them extra scope to unravel and use the DEM properly. DEM properly. I have written a small education note to one journal. So writing these things and where we are lacking, and at the same time knowing completely mathematics. A pure mathematician is given DEM and he doesn't have any interest. But having earth science knowledge and knowing some significant knowledge in these mathematical areas would really show wonders.
Thank you.
Sir, so I would assume that greater roughness implies greater irregularity in the terrain.
Irregular. Yes.
One, and You talked about directional roughness. So, for a surface feature or a landform, is that mainly controlled by what parameter? The slope curvature, direction aspect?
Yeah, the moment slope is there, of course, elevation is one aspect. So randomly varying elevation. And so how we compute the roughness is the same rule which is in compact form like this with an origin at the center. And I will change the origin to the vertices and I remove all other things. One dimensional things I will take. If I, yeah, it is like a kind of vision problem also. In computer vision we use this mostly.
So what I'm asking is it about the profile curvature of a landform, the planar curvature, tangential curvature? What controls the roughness or the directional roughness?
Directional roughness has a relationship with orientation of the base.
Orientation, okay.
I think that has the, some partial
Right.
answer to your question.
So there's an entire work on orientation analysis of drainage lines.
Yes. And somebody questioned me, why you have to do this? And we have simple rose diagram.
Yes, we do.
With rose diagram we can do it. But I don't know, in rose diagram we don't really take, we take probably the lineaments, fractured things. But we don't consider every bit of the region within a basin. So it is not just every bit and how that bit would change with scale. And that is where we are using that cascade of contraction expansions. So that is the advantage over many other things like even fractal dimensions I say. Fractal geometry I see it's a beautiful field but when I compare that with mathematical morphology, I could see mathematical morphology has more mathematical basis than.
Thank you.